Well, good morning. It's great to be here. Great to see some faces familiar and ones I've missed. Welcome to the children's story this morning. If you have joined us in the last couple of weeks, you might remember who the story is about. If you haven't joined us, then I'm going to give you a little clue as I talk. And for those of you who may have joined us and then forgotten, this might remind you what it's about. Today's story is about being in the right place at the right time to do the right thing to help someone. And I have 3 stories for you, and they're all about, or they all include 14-year-old girls. Kind of cool, eh? So the very first story is about me. When I was 14, I was heading upstairs to my bedroom. And in our house, growing up, when you went up the stairs, my room was to the right. My parents' room was straight ahead, and there was a bedroom to the left. I like to talk with my hands, so I had to do some of this paper folding at home because this is the clue I'm going to give you, and I'm telling you, it's a lot harder than it looks on YouTube, so I'm just going to assemble some of this here. Let's see if I can remember how it goes here. And anyway, so I was heading up to my room, and I had something I was going to do there. I had no intention of doing anything else. I was just heading up to my room. And I got to the top of the stairs, and instead of turning right, I turned left. And I went into that other bedroom. And in that other bedroom was my niece, who was just a baby. And she was asleep. She was taking a nap. There was no sound. There was nothing that caused me to go in there. I just went in there. And when I went in there, I looked at her, and she was blue. And she was not breathing. And so I picked her up. I yelled for my mom. I ran downstairs with her. My mom called the ambulance. And then we shook her, turned her upside down, hit her on the back, whatever you do in your panic moments, and she started to breathe again. And by the time the ambulance got there, she was fine. But it never happened before. It never happened after. We don't know why it happened then. Except that I do know that I believe God had me in the right place at the right time to do the right thing to help someone. My second story is about our daughters, Kristen and Jill. And Jill was probably 14, and her cousin Kelsey was 14. And then our older daughter, Kristen, was about 16. And they were sitting on the dock at their grandmother's cottage. And we had brought their grandmother up to see her cottage. She had had a stroke, so she wasn't able to be up there very much. And there was a woman who attended her, and we brought her up with us. And she was at the cottage. And while all the adults were up at the cottage visiting with Grandma, the 3 girls were down on the dock. And they were just sitting there. And the woman who was Grandma's helper decided to go for a swim. So she went down to the water, and we didn't know her well at all, and she didn't know us. She was lovely, but we didn't know her. And so she came down, and she looked at the girls and smiled, just 2 14-year-old girls and a 16-year-old girl sitting on the dock. And one of 2 things must have happened. One is she thought she could swim, and she couldn't. Or she thought maybe she could wade into the water and maybe just go up to her knees or something. So what happened is she, sorry, I just want to get this right before I keep talking with my hands. She was walking in on a rock right about here. And what she didn't know is the water is very shallow right there, but right about here, the rock dropped off. And it was 30 feet deep right there. So she walked in and promptly disappeared, right? And then was thrashing and obviously needing help. So Kristen dove in and pulled her to the shore, and the 2 14-year-old girls helped get her up back on dry land. And I believe, once again, that God had them in the right place at the right time to do the right thing to help someone. Because if they hadn't been there and she thought she was on safe ground, I think it would have been a very very different ending. So these aren't sailboats. Maybe you thought they were going to be sailboats. That is not a sailboat. It is a crown. So for those of you who might not have remembered or haven't read this story yet, it's about Esther, Queen Esther. And when her story is introduced to us, she's about 14 years old. And Miss Susan shared with you last week that things hadn't always been so great at the very beginning of her life. There were some sad things with Queen Esther. She lost both of her parents, and she was raised by her cousin, Mordecai, who was like a father to her. And then she was kind of forced into a contest she probably didn't want to be in. And she was in a contest to be queen. Now, that might sound lovely, but I'm guessing Esther probably wasn't thrilled about it at 14. And she won. She was chosen, so she was Queen Esther at 14. Now, Mordecai was probably, he was fatherly and he was concerned, so he hung out around the palace where Queen Esther had to live, and he hung out at the King's Gate. So the King's Gate would have been a place where a lot of people gathered and talked, and probably a bit of gossip and a bit of conversation going on. And Mordecai happened to hear a conversation between two men, and they had plotted to kill the king. So Mordecai got the word to Esther. Either he was able to speak to her, or he sent the message to her and said, "Tell the king there's a plot to kill him." And Esther did. And the king was saved, and the plot was foiled, and Queen Esther gave Mordecai some credit for that, which we'll find out why that's really important in the next few weeks that we study this story. And again, Mordecai and Esther both were in the right place at the right time to do the right thing to help someone. I think that it's really cool that God used in his history with mankind and in the telling of his story, of his love for us, his desire to have a relationship with us, his desire for us to know him, that in many instances in the Bible, we have stories of children and young teenagers where God used them to be in the right place at the right time to do the right thing to help someone. And for those of you watching at home, perhaps you can remember some of these names. I would love for you to look up some of these stories if you don't know them. If you do know them, maybe you'll want to review them in your in some time of reading, because there's quite a few. Anyway, Samuel was called when he was young. David was a young boy when he was a shepherd boy and went and defeated Goliath. Rhoda, I love that story. It's a funny one, so look that one up. Esther, of course. And remember, we've done the story of the boy with the loaves and fishes. He was just a young boy. All he had was his lunch, but he gave it, and it was part of a big story that Jesus told. And I think that's pretty cool. There was a young girl who served her, she was a maidservant to Naaman's wife. And she said, Naaman had leprosy, and she said, "I think if he would go see Elisha, he would get some help with that." And she was in the right place at the right time. She did the right thing, and she helped someone. Daniel was a young man when he was a young teenager when he was taken, no doubt. Miriam, Moses' sister, sat on the bank of the river watching to see who came and picked up her little brother Moses, and she was helpful in that story. And then, of course, Mary. Mary was a young teenage girl when she was in the whole story of Jesus being born. So those are all it's really inspiring to think that, you may think you're young and what can I do? But I just would challenge you to read some of those stories and also to look for ways that God would be using you to be in the right place at the right time to do the right thing to help someone. Thank you.